Any other mayoral candidates?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah?
No.
All right,
Just kidding.
so welcome to all, thank you so much. So very much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here and ask questions and share your concerns with people directly engaged in updating our city's comprehensive plan. First, just a little bit of housekeeping. If anyone has parked on the south side parking lot, go park your car, bring it back here, put it on the street. If you go on this little street to the corner, it's also free parking. And of course, at any time, we have ample food and drinks. Please make yourself at home. For anybody who's concerned about what happens to the food, we've identified families who live in the neighborhood, and we'll make food packets for them and not with them to eat. But you're welcome to eat the whole thing. The bathrooms are located just behind here on the second hallway, and feel free to use the one that applies to your gender at birth, current gender identity, or if you're in a rush, any empty stall will do. I ask that questions be pointed to allow time for everyone. I will be the one to point out who is next to speak, hopefully without error, and ask that everyone's questions and answers be respectfully listened to before voicing a to-the-point, courteous rebuttal or disagreement. Our list of guests include all of you in the audience, of course, from District 2 neighborhoods that share similarities with ours, as well as our very own residents. Those present at last night's Historical Neighborhood Alliance meeting, Councilor Benton, who I thought you would join us here, but that's fine, who is a co-sponsor of the update of the city's comprehensive plan, Andrew Webb, who is the planning liaison on the city council, and finally but not least, the ones doing the dirty work on our behalf and the cities, Russell Brito and Micaela, and from the planning department. And I know we have a couple of other people sitting here. Can you introduce yourselves?
I'm Carrie Sarkhurst with the planning department. I'm Shanna Schultz. I also work at council with the neighborhood planner.
So there is a goal for tonight. Actually, there's two. Our final goal tonight is one, for each of you to be able to attend the city council's meeting this Monday, March 6th, and it starts at 5 p.m. And two, to register to speak your support to either approve or not the comp plan that we're discussing tonight. It is critical that your voice be heard at any level, so please make it so. There is free parking under Civic Plaza if anybody has issues with that, see me at the end. Take your stop to the meeting, your parking stop, and they'll validate it. And you will park on the second level, go to the first level, and you'll see how to go to the chambers. Councilor Benton has offered to open our meeting, and he will in a second. Mr. Brito will then introduce us to the work we've done, and then we will promptly get to your questions and concerns and how they are addressed, perhaps even resolved in the proposed comp plan.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you for organizing the meeting and for everybody to come out. Some of you are like me, two nights running, and we appreciate your interest in the comp plan and in the whole effort to update and reform the development process. I want to just say, and after we had a meeting last night with a lot of questions. This is complicated stuff. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Those of us who've been in the development business, and I was an architect before I was a city council, I actually made a living trying to interpret our codes for people. That wasn't my primary source of income, but as a consultant to folks who were trying to make their way through our development ordinances, I realized that they're very complex, and it really took me as an architect in professional practice. I would say most of my career, by the time I was ready to retire, I sort of understood it. But it is a very complex, our existing process is very complex. And when we talk about the comprehensive plan, we have a comprehensive plan already. A lot of the language that's in there, most of the language that's in there, you will also find in the current plan. But the original conception of that comprehensive plan was back in the 1980s. It was updated slightly, relatively small updates with the exception of the centers and quarters policy. So you'll see a lot about centers and quarters in this plan. That is already in our existing plan. So those are policies the city's had for a long time. And one thing that's important to realize with this whole effort, the comprehensive plan is our policy. It includes our policy and our goals as a community. It doesn't regulate anything. It really just talks about where do we want to go? What do we want development to look like? How do we want to protect our neighborhoods and our environment? How do we want to deal with big issues like just getting across the river for our friends who live on the west side? And then the integrated development ordinance and our regulatory documents. The existing system is an old zoning code that was created in the 1950s, late 1950s. It was enacted in the city. And that code was kind of an off-the-shelf document that the city bought and adopted and enacted. And it was very suburban oriented. It really, in my opinion, does not recognize very well the uniqueness of our historic neighborhoods. You know, when we have a city that goes back 300 years and beyond, and that culture, and that the neighborhoods like Martineztown, neighborhoods like Old Town, Barelas, were not really covered very well by that. It was a very suburban-oriented document. So over the years, we've had the sector plan process, and that's been great because it has created special acknowledgement of these historic neighborhoods. On the other hand, we have 64 of them, I believe. And if we were to try to fill in the rest of the city that still has that old straight zoning code with no sector plans, we probably need 60 more. That would make 120 separate documents. And in my time on the council, I've found that, you know, eventually when things just aren't working out, we end up getting it on an appeal to the council, and the council sits as a judicial body in that instance. It's supposedly not political at that point. We're trying to just read it as it is written and interpret it accordingly and try to settle those issues. But a lot of those plans that come to it, or development ideas and applications that come to us on appeal, clearly it's because somebody did not understand, and that somebody could have been part of the development team. It could have been a person at the front desk at the planning department who received the application and didn't connect that it was in this sector plan or that one. Or it could have been, you know, neighborhood activists who say, you know, we don't want this in our community. We think that we have backup for that in our sector plan, and they might not interpret it correctly either, you know, based on the way it was established. So it is a very complicated process. The intention is trying to make it simpler for everybody. And I think one important thing to note is that it's intended to have a system of continuous improvement. And none of these, like our present system is certainly not perfect. What's being presented here is not 100% perfect either. I would not purport that to be the case. At the same time, we've got to have an ability to continue to improve these documents when we update them. And I think that's one good thing about the present proposed plan, is that there's an entire system laid out for continuing to improve it and analyze whether it's working or not. So, you know, fix it where it's not. So anyway, that's my introduction. It's complex stuff. It's very difficult sometimes to understand, and of course it's all tied up with land use law. And land use law, there's a whole industry of attorneys who work on land use law, and there's a big there's a powerful lobby, if you will, of private land ownership in this country, and that sometimes runs up and butts up against what we want for our neighborhoods, and that's what we try to sort it out through these kind of documents. So, welcome and thanks. I'm mostly here to listen, and this is the staff that we've depended on to get the plans up to this point.
still being here and still coming to learn more and to think more with us and to get it even better as we go along. So I'm going to give kind of an overview of where we are and why we're here, why we think we can improve today's system. And I tried to really think about what questions you might have and hope to answer them, or start to answer them with the presentation and leave lots of time for discussion at the end. So we start with today's system. And here you've got those 60 plus documents that Councillor Benton mentioned, plus some Arroyo corridor plans, plus some area plans, plus some other things. And about half of those plans have policy in them, but about half don't. And about 40 of those documents have zoning and the rest don't. And some of the documents that have policies have 3. And some of the documents that have policies have pages and pages and pages and pages of thinking and planning and policy in them. So from where I stand in this, and I'm wearing my city hat here, from where I stand, that pile of documents, some were made with great community work, community-driven, community-led plans. But some of them weren't. Some of them were done in the 1970s to check a box for federal housing money. And they don't have policies in them, and they don't have zoning in them, and we haven't updated them in 20, 30, 40 years. Half of those documents are more than 10 years old, which means that some of the information in there is still relevant because not everything changes all the time. Some of the needs in those documents are still needs because we haven't gotten around to addressing all those issues. But some of the protections laid out in those plans were protections that we thought were a good idea 20 or 30 or 40 years ago. And we know better now how to protect neighborhoods and protect community identity and protect the special places in Albuquerque that we love, that we don't want to change, that we don't want to see destroyed by a suburban zoning code, for example. We also have, as Councillor Benton mentioned, we did one update of the zoning code in the 70s. We took that off-the-shelf code in 59 and replaced it with an off-the-shelf code in the 70s. But it's still a suburban code. It doesn't work well for those areas like the area that we're in right now, the Martineztown neighborhood, where this community has been here for hundreds of years before zoning was ever invented. And so the sector development plans were each considered a better way to protect communities with zoning and with policy than the system could do. And that was great. But again, from my perspective, the space between each of those plans is a crack for enforcement to fall into. It's a time for certain neighborhoods to have policy protections and certain neighborhoods not to. And certain neighborhoods to have the latest thinking and certain neighborhoods not to. And we only have two of us here, but there's another 3 of us, long-range planners. We could spend the rest of our careers, and the next generation could spend the rest of their careers just trying to update those plans and keep them up to date, not to mention the other areas of the city that don't have those same protections. So what we've tried to do in this process is to take the policy protections, all of the policy protections in those documents, and pull them into one document, the comprehensive plan, which is a plan for both the city and the county to move us forward as a community. And we take the zoning out of these documents and decide what's the best parts of those, what are the protections that they need to provide, and bring them over into one document, the Integrated Development Ordinance, that we can keep up to date every year. Not every 20 years, every year. And the comprehensive plan from here on out gets updated every 5 years. Not every 20 years, but every 5 years. So just graphically looking, those yellow areas are the places that have either a sector plan or an area plan or an overlay of some kind. Special planning attention that resulted in either a policy or a regulation. What we're proposing to replace that with is a system that's a 5-year cycle of planning for all communities, with communities. So that we as a long-range staff and the planning department would come to your communities, work with you as stakeholders, work with your business owners, work with your nonprofits, build relationships, get a sense of what's happening in your neighborhood, what are the issues that you're facing, and what opportunities can we help to realize to push things forward. And the result of that planning turns into recommendations to update the policy document, the comprehensive plan, or to update the regulatory integrated development ordinance, which replaces the zoning code. So we think that as a long-range staff, we can work as a team to cover all areas of the city every 5 years, which is not happening today. So we agree that the sector development plans have important policy protections in them, they have important regulatory protections in them, and they have important information about each community's goals, history, vision, identity, and the process that we're proposing pulls those policies into the comp plan, pulls the regulations into the integrated development ordinance, and pulls that information from those documents that's neither policy nor regulation into what we're calling community planning area assessments that are updated every 5 years. So, as a system, we go from where we are today, which is we don't have the time, the money, the staff to keep things up to date and to do the good planning work that we know needs to be done to protect our communities, to a system where the comprehensive plan has that long-range 25-year vision that gets looked at and analyzed every 5 years to answer the question, where are we going as a community and where do we want to go? Every year we have the question for the integrated development ordinance, what extra regulatory protections do we need? What's not working and what do we need to fix? And every 5 years we visit each community planning area to say, what else do you need? What else can we do? What other departments can we bring with us who can help implement the things that aren't regulatory and aren't policy, but still need to be done from the city's perspective? So the comp plan only has the vision and the goals and the policies. It's a policy document. The integrated development ordinance brings in the regulations. Those are the teeth. We can require applicants to do things because it's in this document. And the CPA assessment, the community planning area assessment process, is really the replacement for community planning, ongoing basis into the future. So let me talk a little bit about the comp plan, which is all filled with shoulds. And I had this great interaction with a non-supporter of our project, and she said, well, I just don't know how to critique the comp plan because I keep reading it, and all it has is shoulds in it, and it says all these great things, and I don't know how I'm supposed to critique it. I said, well, it's a policy document, so shoulds are the language of policy, and if you're reading things that you like, that is your critique of the document. So the comprehensive plan, which I mentioned, is both for the city and the county. I'll just say that there are a lot of places in the county that are other jurisdictions that are either tribes or Los Ranchos or a bit of Rio Rancho or Corrales. Those areas are not covered by this comprehensive plan. It only speaks to the unincorporated areas of the county, which are fully under the county's control, and all of the city of Albuquerque. In terms of the comprehensive plan, it's not the document that the planning department turns to every time a development project comes through the door. We use the zoning code for that. What we use the comprehensive plan to do is to say, given the vision, given the long-range goal of the city and the county, is it a good idea to change a particular zone? Is it a good idea to adopt a new plan or a new regulation? Is it a good idea to spend money on a particular thing, to make an investment, whether it's a capital project or staffing of a certain kind? The comprehensive plan should guide those kinds of decisions moving forward. So the vision, as Councilor Benton mentioned, since about 2001, the vision in the comprehensive plan is one of centers and corridors. And what I mean by that are these little colored dots, different colors of different sizes, that represent areas where non-residential and residential stuff is happening, where it can cluster. And it clusters usually at the intersection of roads. And the roads themselves, or corridors, connect these places of activity so that you can get around to each of those centers by transit, or by driving, or by walking, that you have multiple choices to get around. And so the different colored dots represent a different intensity of uses in those centers. So downtown is the biggest and the most intense because it's a downtown, it's the most urban place that we have. What we heard during a visioning process in May and June of 2015, that today's comprehensive plan has too many urban centers. And that maybe in Albuquerque, we don't want to be urban everywhere. And maybe it's okay to have some more suburban areas, and maybe it's okay to have not everything walkable everywhere. And so the updated comprehensive plan includes a centers and corridors map that really pulls back from that vision of density and urban, so that there are only two places that are envisioned to be pretty urban over time and to be really walkable. One is around Uptown, thank you. The other one is Volcano Heights, in the location where Paseo and Unser cross. It's currently an undeveloped area altogether. By the way, let me just say that all of these little dots are established in today's comprehensive plan. So the update only changed the color of them, the flavor, or how intense they're going to envision to be over time. We didn't add any little circles that hadn't already been adopted either by the city or the county. The other thing that is new for this comprehensive plan are a set of guiding principles. And these came directly out of all of our public engagement efforts through the visioning process, but also through lots of focus groups that we had about the different topics in the comp plan. And these are the things that we heard the most often and the most loudly and the most passionately, that we are a community of neighborhoods, first and foremost. And they're unique, and they're distinct, and they're vibrant, and they're fabulous, and they need to be protected, full stop. We also heard that choices for how to get around are really important. That yes, most of us drive, but wouldn't it be great if it was a little bit safer and a little bit easier and a little bit more viable to take the bus or to walk or to ride a bike? Not that everybody's going to, not that everybody has to, but wouldn't it be great if people were a little bit safer and a little bit more able to make those choices if they want to? The other thing we heard is that economic development should be about people and not just about chasing smokestacks. That we need high quality of life for all of us. And perhaps our economic development efforts should focus on building small businesses, entrepreneurship, really focusing on what great ideas do we have here and how do you build on the assets that come from the people in our community. Another thing we heard that's not in today's comprehensive plan that we are really excited to add is the idea about equity. Not all of our communities are faced with the same challenges. Not all of our communities have the same needs. And that we should probably be prioritizing the places that have the most needs and the most challenging issues in terms of our investment, in terms of our planning, and really get to the point where all of us have a high quality of life. Community health, not in today's comprehensive plan, but we all know, hugely important. And so we are excited to introduce throughout, I will say that the guiding principles are woven throughout every chapter in the comprehensive plan. And community health also shows up in a brand new chapter on resilience and sustainability, where we talk about environmental justice, again, not in today's comp plan, hugely important to many of our at-risk communities. That discussion, again, is important to add to our comprehensive plan. And lastly, the idea of sustainability, that if we're not being careful about our water, careful about our land, careful about our air quality, that we can't pass on the great community that we have to our children and to our grandchildren. So I won't go through each of these, but just so that you know, the new structure of the comprehensive plan is a chapter for each of these topics. And that chapter includes a narrative discussion, and then the goals and the policies follow it. So the narrative discussion really tries to explain to people why this topic is important and some of the trends that have been happening and some of the challenges and strategies to move us closer to the community vision. And the policies get toward what should the city and the county be using to make decisions as they move forward about new plans, new zones, new funding. Another really important tool that's not in today's comprehensive plan is one that we're calling areas of change and areas of consistency. Today's comp plan has something called development areas, and they're things like established urban, developing urban, semi-urban, semi-rural, rural. The rural areas are remaining in the, mostly because they are in the county, and the county's not changing their development areas. Within the city, though, we looked at the map and thought most things have, since the last comp plan, when these were introduced in the 70s, are now urban. They're established urban. But not all of them want to be highly walkable, dense places, which urban seems to describe. So we're proposing to replace those development area descriptions with these two. And we went through a mapping exercise that took the existing information about land use and zoning and created these maps based on just pulling in the information that exists today. So the areas of change include those centers, minus Old Town, which we don't really want to pave over. And they include the corridors, minus commuter corridors, which are going to stay kind of an auto-oriented thing. And they include park and ride transit centers, which we hope transition into better things over time. And they include metropolitan redevelopment areas because they have been adopted to encourage development in those areas. And lastly, they include adopted master plan business parks and industrial parks where you want to encourage jobs to grow. So each of those has been adopted by the city as places where we want to encourage growth, investment, and development. And these are the dark orange areas, which I hope you can see are pretty concentrated around centers and corridors because that's the vision. The rest becomes an area of consistency. These are single-family neighborhoods, both use and zoning. They include golf courses and airport facilities and major public open space and parks and cemeteries. They also include some commercial uses and other things that aren't expected to really redevelop and grow. So the policies in the comprehensive plan about these two things say, if Albuquerque is going to grow, the most appropriate places for us to grow are in the areas of change. And in the areas of consistency, we're not encouraging growth in this comprehensive plan by policy. We're saying if you're going to develop in those areas of consistency, you have to be respectful of the scale, character, and intensity that surrounds you, because we don't want to change the character of those places. This is a tool that's used in many other cities these days. It's kind of the latest and greatest way that cities can say, here's where to grow, here's where not to grow. It doesn't stop development from happening in these yellow areas, but it helps to identify where it's appropriate and where it's not. So in terms of the community planning area assessment, I mentioned there are 12 community planning areas. Actually, let me step back. Today's comprehensive plan identifies community planning areas. We have adjusted the boundaries slightly and made sure that all areas of the city have a community planning area. And the proposal on the table from the city side is that the long-range staff does 3 of these community planning areas a year, spending 4 months in that community out of that year, working with you all, working with stakeholders, bringing our compatriots at the city, maybe even our counselors along to answer questions about how are you investing in our roadways, and what about that pothole, what about this park, doing walking tours, all those fun things that we can do to learn together about what you need and how we can help. And so that takes care of 12 community planning areas over the course of 4 years. And then we take everything that we've learned, we take all the analysis that we've done over the course of that process, and on the 5th year, we update the comprehensive plan with those recommendations that we've gathered along the way. And we've heard along this process that 5 years is a long time to wait. Well, some communities have been waiting 20 years, and they're still waiting, and there's no plan on how we can address them all. This at least gets everybody covered every 5 years. So in District 2, there are pieces of 3 different community planning areas. And today you've got about, what do we think, about 20 different sector plans and maybe 1 different area plan. So I wanted to just walk you through how you can see, you can check my claim that all the policies from your sector plans made it into the comp plan. So online, and this presentation is available, and I'll also put it on our project website for you tomorrow. You can go to this link and it pulls up a policy matrix. And that matrix shows you all of the existing adopted language from those plans, and then shows you which chapter in the comprehensive plan it landed and what the policy or action is. So you can go find it. And when you go to the comprehensive plan document, which is available in libraries, in community centers, it's online, and you can also check one out from the planning department. Or I think
We have one here as well.
we have one here as well. You can go to that number. So right here we saw this was 812, I can't see, 812 and 8211 and 826. So you go to that chapter 8 and you find policy 812 and you see how the language looks now. And you can compare it to adopted language, improved economic conditions through coordinated public and private actions, and how it turned into a whole set of ideas, including job training in another policy. So you can kind of see, did they get it right? Did they not get it right? Did they capture the intent and the full sense of what we were trying to get to in that adopted language or not? And we encourage people to say, you didn't get it right, please fix X, Y, and Z. In terms of the integrated development ordinance, this is where you get the shalls. And a lot of people say, why aren't there teeth in the comp plan? Well, it's because that's a policy document and it can't have teeth. But the regulations can. So the regulatory document, the integrated development ordinance, is where you find your shalls. And it's where you find the requirements for how we're going to protect communities in the future. So we went through each of the sector development plans and we read them closely. And we said, okay, is this regulation out of the sector plans really a best practice? Particularly in the case of the sector plans that have been done very recently, they're really just great protections that haven't been extended citywide because only one sector plan got that protection. And if that was the case, if it was really just a great protection, we made it citywide in the integrated development ordinance. In some of the cases, it was really just about that community. It was a unique idea about character or community identity in that particular place. If that was true, it's brought over as a map in the, you're actually showing me maps. It's brought over as a map in the integrated development ordinance in one of several buckets, which I'll get into in a second. And then the last one is, in some of the cases, particularly the older sector development plans, they were just old ideas that didn't work very well. And so we replaced those with the newest best practices for the citywide standards in the integrated development ordinance. What I like, and which is really scary to some people about the integrated development ordinance, is it has multiple places where those individual rules for individual places show up. One is a whole 3 different tools for an overlay zone, where special rules for special places apply. And we use those in the case where it was mostly about building design or about kind of how the built environment should look. There's also these little maps in the use-specific standards. And you'll find these after the permissive use table, which I'll show you in a second. But they're really standards about a particular use, like, I don't know, alcohol, or pawn shops, or drive-up service windows, where the impacts of that particular use are about that use, not necessarily about a particular area or neighborhood. And so a lot of the protections from those sector development plans became use-specific standards when they're associated with that use. The other place where you'll find a lot of these little mapped special protections are in the development standards themselves. In some of the sector plans, they said, I know citywide you can do that with carports, but not here. And those standards fall in the development standards. And lastly, a couple of the sector plans say we want a special process, particularly about demolition. And so you'll find those special rules about process in the review and approval procedures. So if you want to track where your sector plan's regulations went, there are several different ways. One is in the document itself, where the footnotes say where sector plans, because they were best practices or because it was a unique mapped area, the footnote captures that information. So you'll see the sector plans referenced in the footnotes. We've also added a table of contents for those mapped areas, organized in two different ways right after the table of contents. And one is organized in the following the organization of the document itself, so that you can see how many mapped areas have prohibitions on surface commercial parking lots, for example, as the Martineztown plan has. The second organization is by small area. So if you wanted to know how many of the small maps came over from the South Broadway and San Jose area, you can check by those as well. The other way that you can check about how your regulations were pulled over is by a conversion map. This is also available on the project website. And what it's showing you is on the left, these are existing zones as they are today, as they are adopted today. And on the right are the proposed conversions of those same zones in a new set of letters established by the Integrated Development Ordinance. So it's important to note that we are not making discretionary zone changes from residential to commercial to residential is what we're doing. What we're trying to do is take a set of about 1,700 zones, depends on how you count, and turn them into a manageable set of about 20, including these small area protections that are also incorporated in the IDO. The other way is we have a special table of the sector plan zones and their conversions. So it lists them in order of the sector plans, all of the zones established by that sector plan and what they turn into in the new system. And lastly, we've just created handouts for each and every sector plan that are available on the web page so that you can see where do the policies go, what regulations show up, and what are the zone conversions. So these are also available online. In terms of the document itself, there are really 3 content chapters. And the first one is about land uses. What can I do in my property given a certain zone? And they're shown to you in a table format. And I know people are used to saying, I want to know what happens in O1. Let me go read O1, and O1 has a list of uses. But I got to tell you, today's zoning code sends you up. Well, if you want to know about IP, go read M1. And if you want to know about R3, go read R2 and R1 and onward. So even in today's system, you can't get everything in 3 pages. This table at least says, for all of the zones in Albuquerque, here's where you can do drive-thrus, for example, and here's where you can't. And lastly, the chapter on, not lastly, sorry, I lied. The development standards chapter says, how high can my building be? What are my setbacks? How much parking do I have to provide? How much landscaping needs to be between residential and industrial uses, for example? And lastly, the chapter on the approval processes. Who gets notified about projects and for which projects? Who at the city can approve different projects? Can it be done by staff? Can it be done by the Development Review Board? Does it need to go to City Council for approval? That's all in table format for the different kinds of things that people come and ask us for permission to do on their properties. So the other thing that people are upset about, and I'll just be really upfront about this, is there's a misunderstanding in today's system. People think that neighborhoods get notified of all development. They don't. If you have straight C2, straight C1, R1, R2, R3, and you build according to those standards in that zone, you go straight through to building permit with a zoning check along the way. There's no notification. If you have an SU1, meaning a site plan and zoning for one particular parcel, you go before the Environmental Planning Commission. And there are a few other things that go to the Environmental Planning Commission. But a lot of the development that happens today goes straight through to building permit. The new system says, even though things may be going to building permit, you need to have a meeting with the neighborhood associations before you submit to the city. Meaning, before you spend a lot of time and money, and before everybody gets upset, go talk about it. Tell the neighborhoods what you're planning to do. Give them an opportunity to say, I have these concerns. Have you thought about X? It would be great if you would add a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of less of this, a little bit less of that. And if those agreements can be reached, they will put them in their site plan and bring them to the city to approve. It's an upfront negotiation as opposed to a fight later. They are required to meet with the neighborhood associations. They are not required to do everything the neighborhood associations say, and that's not true in today's system either. One additional tool that we're excited about in the Integrated Development Ordinance, a lot of the standards out of the sector plans today, in a million different ways, try to talk about how to protect single-family homes from non-residential development next to them. Because that's a scary thing. If you're a single-family home, oh my gosh, what do you mean they have zoning that allows them to do something big and tall and scary? This, I don't know why it keeps jumping forward, it hates me. The neighborhood edge section, which is found on 4.8, maybe it's on a timer or something. Maybe that means I'm going too slow. I'm almost done. You can see the last slide is right there. Every time a non-residential development happens next to a zone that is RA, R1, RMC, or RT, in other words, all the non-residential zones, that development within 100 feet of the property line shared or across the street from this single-family house, they can't go above 30 feet. The rest of their property beyond that 100 feet, they can go up to the full height allowed by their zone. But at least for that shared distance of 100 feet, their building heights are capped, their lighting has to come down, their circulation patterns have to not impact negatively this single-family house. So it's a way citywide to protect all single-family and other residential zone properties from non-residential that happens next to it. Okay, next. All right. So the comp plan only is in front of the City Council on March 6th. That vote, if it happens, or a deferral, that decision has no impact on the sector development plans. They stay in place. There is language in the comp plan that describes what we're hoping to do over time to provide a better and more equitable system, but the vote itself about the comprehensive plan has no effect on the sector plans. Where the sector plans come in is the discussion about the Integrated Development Ordinance, which starts the review and approval process at the Environmental Planning Commission on April 6th. So it'll go to the Planning Commission for probably at least 2, 3, maybe 4 different hearings, providing lots of opportunity for public input. We're holding those hearings from 1 p.m. to 8 p.m., just anticipating that lots of folks will have lots to say, and it might come back multiple times. That's the discussion about what happens to the sector plans and whether they are fully incorporated, the regulations are fully incorporated into the Integrated Development Ordinance or not. So our team, in addition to coming to meetings like this, which we're really excited about the opportunity to talk to you all, we also offer office hours every Monday and Friday afternoons. We hold our schedules open just to talk with folks about whatever your concerns are. You can email a project email, what's that called? Email address, there we go. Or you can call me and request an appointment. And if you'd like us to come to a different neighborhood association or a different group, we're happy to do that as well. So that's all I have to say. Let's answer questions.
Will there be any moratoriums in these 5-year periods, or you don't just get a rush of developers trying to take over?
Councilor Benton? That one's for you.
Well, yeah, we had that question last night about a specific moratorium that hasn't been passed. We've got it before the council. And that
But I mean,
it's really not, based on this effort, we probably would be doing it anyway because we already have a quarter plan on North Fourth and there are concerns about whether that's working or not and whether there may be some issues with it. And so in one of the zones within that corridor, we're proposing a moratorium. We'll see where that goes, or whether there's support for that in the council or not. But there's no intention to put a moratorium on development. I think somebody asked that question, can we just do that, and totally not allow any building permits, commercial building permits while this process goes forward? I don't think there's any intention for that, but certainly if we see that there's some area of weakness where somebody could be trying to take advantage of that, would certainly want to consider that and would accept proposals from the community to do that. I will say that if you think about it, the existing system is all there and in place, and anybody can go tomorrow morning down and apply under the old system. So until this system is in place, we're still, I think it would be very difficult to get support, let's put it that way, of a majority of the councilors to say no development can occur until we finish this process. There'd be huge pressure to not allow that. And I would say that might be a risky thing for our economy too. I mean, to some extent, we've got, if somebody's ready to open a business, we got to try to help them open that business, unless it's something, that's totally negative impact on a neighborhood, obviously. So, but no present idea about that. But if somebody sees some area of weakness where we feel like we need to enact moratoriums and something, I'll always consider.
What I should have said, what specifically in your HNA neighborhood,
Right, in the historic neighborhood, so until this IDO park gets in place, your existing sector plan, as antiquated as it is, and you know it is, would still be in effect. But yeah, I mean, we consider that for any neighborhood, I think. I certainly, when I hear any concern about weakness that might be in the interim periods.
I think that's one reason why the proposal for a 24-month deferral for the comprehensive plan, in my opinion, doesn't allow us to extend the policy protections that currently aren't covering all neighborhoods today. At least we get them covered on a policy perspective in the comprehensive plan by adopting an updated plan, which doesn't affect the sector plans.
On that, real quick, let somebody else talk. Doesn't have to. What if we get a 12-month stitch? I think that'd give us enough time to work out some ideas too. You not just have to be stuck on a 24-month, and I know that might not sound good to the council. Even a 12-month would help a lot.
Yeah, at this time, I think we're looking at a compromise. I mean, this has been a top-down approach throughout the whole thing, as you know, I continuously stated. And so we're saying we would like a compromise, Councillor. This is not what we're wanting. This is not a community plan. It's a developers and business plan. And, I'm sure that they got everything they wanted because they're the ones that went and said, we like what you have done, but we have grave concerns about the high density that you're proposing with no study. We want to make sure that we are protected in this plan, and we see a lot of things that change our identity. And I think that's the strongest thing that we feel is that our identity is taken away. We do not want to be like Denver or New York, and that's what you're proposing. I mean, you could talk to people from, I remember Jesse was at the Health South when he was there, and the lady that was cleaning the bathrooms was saying, they want us to be like New York. And so that's just the talk on the street. So we're as a planner that's worked 15 years in the planning department and has a master's degree in planning and has worked as a consultant doing land use. I am very clear and understand what you have written in that plan, and I find it very dangerous. And I think that people need to stand up and say, we need at least, we've asked for 24 months, but we're willing to compromise, and we're giving our amendments to this, but it's not enough time for us. We need a lot more time to look at this. But we want to sit down and say, okay, where can we come to an agreement? We're willing to do that. And we're asking you, Councilor Benton, to give us that opportunity.
I think Richard Moore asked the question last night, and I thought that he posed it pretty well, and that is, look, we've gotten to this point, and if we're asking for a deferral, what's the new process? So, I mean, we're hearing it's a top-down process, so what is the process that's being proposed? How are the groups who are saying, well, we should stop and somewhat start over, or at least stop for whether it's a year or 2 years or whatever it is? What is that proposed process? Because we all know, right? And it was, the point has been made, ad infinitum that, working people have a very difficult time getting to meetings for things like this, being active participants in it. So who represents those folks, I mean, yeah, I'm represented, I'm elected to represent them, and I try to, but if that's not good enough, what's the system by which we're going to have better participation from the average person? And I think, clearly, as I said at the beginning, this is complicated stuff to a great extent. The existing system is complicated, and the new system is hopefully better, but still complicated. And the existing system has not served us well. I strongly believe that. I mean, folks that, for instance, in San Jose are dealing with environmental justice issues. That's under their present sector plan. So their present sector plan has not protected them. So that, there's a fear that this won't either. But I think we've got to come to some meeting of the minds about how we would bring more people in. I haven't heard that. I haven't heard that plan by which we're going to bring more people in that have already participated. That makes it hard for me to say, well, yeah, okay, let's just stop everything and reassess.
Perhaps the other thing too, I appreciate the concept of trying to figure out how we're going to bring out other people. It's very difficult and very easy to do that at the same time. There was a great turnout last night. I think we're going to be less of a turnout today, probably because it was the second meeting. But I think the part that I'm confused with, and Russell or Michaela, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, one of the main guests here were all supposed to be District 2 neighborhoods that had similarities with us. And when I spoke to all those people, it was basically residential homes, small streets here and there, poverty, Spanish-speaking, very old neighborhoods. And so we all kind of shared that. And maybe I'm hearing something that's not true, but the little streets that we have, they're going to stay here till the residents decide, okay, we're done with the little streets. But they're now going to be a staple here at Martineztown and probably Villas and some other of the places. We obviously have a lot of residential land use that's on commercial zoning codes, and we're looking at making a mass upgrade or downsizing, downgrade from those people who want to, who are interested of going from their commercial lots to a residential lot, doing a land use zoning code balancing. So we're looking at that. We're not looking at putting 4-story buildings here Even though today we could do that, but with a comp plan, we wouldn't be able to do it anywhere as easily. And we would be able to have more voice in that, whereas today we have no voice in that. So I'm not too sure, Loretta maybe help me out here, but I'm not too sure how it is that we're not protected for preserving our history and our character and that kind of stuff. I don't know if you guys can address those concerns.
That was quite a few questions.
Yes.
Wrapped up in one. I want to start with the application of more recent goals and policy language that are found in some of the more recent sector development plans and how they could be good ideas and provide protection to other similar neighborhoods. And that reminds me of the Los Duranes sector development plan. It's north of Interstate 40, west of Rio Grande Boulevard, but like Martineztown, it's been around for hundreds of years. It has skinny streets like you have here in Martineztown, like other neighborhoods. But that more recent Los Duranes sector plan has specific policy language talking about how those skinny streets are what the residents want. And that more recent sector plan has design standards and cross sections for those skinny streets. Actually infrastructure diagrams that do not benefit other neighborhoods with similar conditions. So we're not only working on the overall vision for the entire city and county, the regulations to guide development to get us to that vision, but we're also working on the technical standards for infrastructure in our development process manual. That's really the document that the engineers look at. Engineers really don't look at sector plans. A lot of sector plans have these illustrative cross sections of streets, but they're just that, illustrative. What we want to do is make sure that those standards for these historic streets, for example, get put into the development process manual. So when the engineers say, well, what kind of street we're going to put in? We're going to put in the 60 wide. Oh no, we're going to do the skinny streets that are now a technical standard in the development process manual, so that we have coordination from the vision to the regulations for private property to the regulations and standards for infrastructure that serves the private property. That's one thing that we don't have now. We don't have that coordination from the vision down to the technical standards. We're trying to do that all at once, so we get lined up now. And we don't have a zoning code from 1970s, sector plans written at different times over the past 40 years, a comprehensive plan that was adopted after the zoning code, and a development process manual that I have no idea how old that is. It's definitely 20th century. It does not reflect current conditions very well. So that's one way we're trying to expand good ideas to where they need to go. You talked about what I'm hearing are areas of change and consistency, where that idea, that vision to protect neighborhoods from potential adverse effects of new development along corridors and activity centers, so that when you look in the IDO, there's that connection to the comprehensive plan vision that says, if you're an area of change and you're next to an area of consistency, you have to drop down in scale. You have to restrict some of those uses next to the residential property, like no drive-up service window on the side of your building that's next to the residential. You have to bring down the height of the lights. You have to. It's a built-in standard. We don't have that citywide now. We have it in a few sector plans, especially the more recent sector plans, but those small areas are the only ones that have that benefit. Some of the other sector plans say, yeah, you need to go to the planning commission, and then the neighborhood has to come out and fight for those protections, for those transitions. We would prefer to just build them in and make them a requirement up front, so the neighborhoods don't have to fight for those transitions or protections, that they can have certainty that it's going to be required, regardless As long as you're in that area of consistency, there'll be some protection from the area of change, some transition, some buffering. For example, here in Martineztown, there's a huge mismatch in some areas of the underlying zoning and what the land use really is. This was something that was done in the 1970s and the 1990s. It definitely can be considered an injustice that was done to the neighborhood, but it's legal. So just because it's an injustice doesn't mean it's not legal, and vice versa. So those property owners with the commercial zoning and the residential use want the protections of a residential zone, want to be in an area of consistency. But then there are those property owners with the commercial zoning. They like their property rights. Maybe they want to keep them. But that's okay too, but there needs to be that buffering, that protection built in. And that's what we want to do to make sure that we don't get a 4-story building in the middle of a single-family neighborhood. Those protections are not in place now. Someone could assemble properties here in Martineztown, buying them from individual property owners. They could assemble them, and because the height is regulated by angle cranes, you could build a pretty big pyramid if you get enough land. Here in Martineztown or other neighborhoods that don't have the neighborhood edge protections. So our project, as Michaela mentioned, is not going to have discretionary zone changes to fix these mismatches, but we want to do that through the community planning area assessments. And if I had my way, Central Albuquerque would be that first community to get that planning assessment done so we can identify these issues that have not been addressed by the sector plans, have not been addressed by our antiquated zoning code, and get them addressed soon and quickly. And that's something that if the council agrees with the assessment, they could do legislatively for a large area and not have to do it property by property. Of course, each property owner would have to agree to downzone themselves, or they could say, no, I like my commercial zoning, but understand they're not going to be able to build a 4-story building even if they have commercial zoning because of the neighborhood edge protections that we built in. It's not something that can happen immediately, but in the terms, in the scale of growth and development and our city that's been here for hundreds of years, if it could happen within a year or 2 after the adoption of the comprehensive plan update and the integrated development ordinance, that's a pretty quick timeline, and hopefully can bring those protections that have been needed for decades to the neighborhoods.
Please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Sue Flint, and I'm not from your neighborhood, but I did want to come and listen because I see you at the city council hearings all the time. My concern is that I'm sitting here listening to the explanation of the planning, and I'm going to be very respectful about this as much as I can because I'm a guest. But when we listen, or when I listen to the explanation, we are the poster child in my neighborhood. And I'm from the North I-25 Sector Development Plan that was done in 2012 that became obsolete 2 years later. I actually filed a $1 billion lawsuit against the mayor and a number of people for coming into our area and not protecting us from development. We live in an area where we are a private community. It's called Sun North Estates, 182 real properties. For the past 5 years, I've been fighting Mr. Brito and Mr. Webb on what they did to us. They came in, they gave us no notice, and respectfully to your district, Councilman Benton, you weren't involved. My councilman is involved with me on this, and we're daily, and I had a conversation with him telling him I was coming here tonight. I'm a little uncomfortable because it's not my sector, but what happened with us, the zoning department came in, decided that 19 whatever comprehensive plan was outdated. We are the only in our development of real property, real estate, that is called residential single family home owned. They came in and did a drop down. They downsized us to what we were in 1979, that we spent years developing into real property. They went ahead and put a commercial drop down in our neighborhood, and we were private. Think of what they can do in the public, out in your neighborhoods. We had no say on it. They just did it. Took years for me to figure out what was going on, because my family developed that community. I knew what the laws were, I knew what the restrictions were, and what the deeds were. And I think you do need to be careful, because when you do read in the IDO, there is one sector that I'm really questioning, because you need to have state statutes in one hand of real property and how it protects your property rights as property owners. You're protected in the federal Constitution of due process. It's up to you to make sure that you watch this, because what they did is they dropped it on us. We had no say. It opened up our community. And who started buying up our community? The very same people who bought up the Atrisco land grant and who are your investors over at Santa Elena. We have a development that used us in a remand based off of Mr. Brito's wrong comprehensive zoning code, which was an SU1 that he brought up. And what happened was they did the drop down of the commercial. Only one stakeholder knew, and he was a stakeholder that had a bill for redevelopment passed, which was the mayor's APQ plan. This is what you need to watch, because the commercial started up. It made a real property into commercial. So,
I think that you guys want to...
well, let me just sum it up real quick. So what happens is when you've got commercial next to residential, that there is no buffer. And I'm sorry that I have to say I don't believe this, but maybe for your community because you're well established and it is noticeable, but you need to watch what you're doing. And I come here as somebody that's an outsider, but I'm from Albuquerque. I grew up here. I've spent the last 5 years studying what's been going on. I think that it's concerning. I think there are pro things in it that help through development and help the way things grow. But when you're looking at 20, 30 years down the road, like they told us, they're going to have to lift that commercial off of us. But it doesn't lift the commercial off of everything around us. And the property that buffers right next to us, we have no buffer zone. They start work at 1 o'clock in the morning and they go until midnight. And we're talking 18-wheelers coming into our area. We're talking running big, heavy equipment. At 1 o'clock in the morning, you lose sleep. So, Mr. Brito, my question is to you, when you were saying that you're going to protect people and bring these protections over from this sector plan, weren't you the person that's worked over the last 20 years in these to make sure those protections are there so that when the zoning comes in, these people shouldn't have to worry whether they get notification or not, like us? We should have been contacted. So I think in your plan, IDO, it should be a requirement that those that are real property and that are on the tax rollout, no matter whether or not they're homeowner association, they're out there by themselves, as long as they're paying property taxes, they should know what affects their individual property. That's part of their constitutional right. So are you taking that in there to make sure what happened, and you know what I'm talking about, that what happened to my community doesn't happen to these people who are historical?
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let's have a question. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for letting me come here.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Sector development plans are a legislative action because they're not site-specific. They're for neighborhoods or group of neighborhoods. So the city council has the authority to adopt these small area plans and change the zoning within them without any kind of required notification to individual property owners, because they're doing it in a legislative way, not a quasi-judicial way. So for example, when someone comes in for a zone change on their individual property, they're making a request to change the land use laws that control their property, and it goes through a quasi-judicial process where there's a set of criteria at a public hearing, they have to explain, there's public notice. And then after the decision is made, there's a notice that goes out to property owners within 100 feet. The existing zoning code has a section about sector development plans, and it's a legislative process. So the city council, acting as the ultimate planning and zoning authority for the city of Albuquerque, can make area-wide changes without notice to individual property owners. There's still requirements per 092 to notify neighborhood associations. And the city does have a pretty robust neighborhood association recognition program. We have over 275 neighborhood associations that are registered with the city of Albuquerque. The neighborhood associations are given notice of anything that goes to a public hearing, and the requirements and the duties of the neighborhood association is then to notify their membership and non-members that live within their boundaries about the public hearing or the action that's proposed to be taken or the request that gets noticed to the neighborhood association. Not all neighborhood associations are as diligent or able to notify residents. I know that Santa Barbara Martineztown, they take leaflets to individual property owners to try to let them know what's going on. But I'm not sure all neighborhood associations do that. And so when these planning processes in the past have happened, the intention is, okay, we're going to use the neighborhood associations to get the word out, and then hopefully people who are interested, stakeholders, businesses, residents of the area can participate in the process. But there's no guarantee that everyone is going to be interested or is going to show up to the public meetings or the public hearings to voice their concerns, their opposition, their support, etc. When the North I-25 sector plan was updated in 2012, it was intended to replace an existing one that had been adopted in the 1990s. Unfortunately, when it got to the city council, the project planner was moved, and I was put in his place at the end of the process. So unfortunately, people think I was the project planner, that I was responsible for the planning effort from the beginning. But there are some folks who just saw me at the city council responding to direction from the city council to do analyses of some existing zoning in the area. I became the face of it, but I was only involved at the very end. Sorry, Sue, it wasn't me.
I know, I got your email.
Russell, I think the bigger question is that's kind of brought up, we can't fix the past, obviously, or at least sort of this meeting won't, but in the future, how are we protected from those kind of city legislative moves of rezoning properties without anybody really kind of being able to do anything about it? Which is what I'm hearing. Am I hearing correctly?
Well,
certainly that would be a big concern for us.
the IDO that Michaela gave the overview of is all public record. Neighborhood associations have been notified through the Office of Neighborhood Coordination, the neighborhood newsletter, of every event we've had, every meeting we've had, of milestones, of a new version of the comp plan coming out, of the next section of the IDO being released. And I think in the future, we're going to continue to want to work with the Office of Neighborhood Coordination and neighborhood associations to get the word out. Because hopefully they are a conduit for information to make sure that residents and members are well informed and can participate in this process.
But I think the more direct answer to your question going forward is that those zoning changes would be coming as a result of a community planning effort with you all, so that it wouldn't be a surprise. It would be something that was asked for During the community planning area assessment, as we noticed, there was either a mismatch of land use and zoning or opportunities to change zoning to either encourage something or discourage something, so that those city-sponsored zoning efforts were actually kind of a bottom-up request to the city to change those laws. And so those community planning area assessments done on a regular cycle and a scheduled cycle would allow you to have much more notice and voice in making the recommendation to change things.
And the issue with the overlay zones, like in North I-25, North 4th Street has these floating zones where you have your existing zoning, and then you have this optional zone that is triggered if you have new development, for example, or on North 4th Street, or if you add a certain square footage or percentage of your existing building. In North I-25 sector plan, it's per the property owner. If the property owner wants to pull down that overlay zone, they can. And part of our work on the conversion map is not only looking at the base zone and the overlay zone, but what's the existing land use. And for example, Sue Flint's neighborhood right now has SU1 for mobile home community zoning that was established sometime in the 20th century. That was brought over in the sector plan, but they put this commercial overlay on it. Well, we've seen that since the plan was adopted, no one has pulled down that zone. So when you look on the conversion map at Sue's neighborhood, it's proposed to be zoned residential, manufactured home community, and would be eligible for all of the neighborhood edge protections from the surrounding properties for new development. It's not going to stop the existing businesses that bother the neighborhood, because those existing businesses have their property rights. But we do want to protect existing neighborhoods and their property rights. It's an odd balance that happens between commercial and residential properties that are next to each other. We want to protect the viability of the business, but we also want to protect the viability of the neighborhood and respect the property rights of each.
So before we go to the next question, and this gentleman has been waiting for a while, if I may. So the answer to the comment is no, that won't happen again in the future.
The idea is that it won't happen again in the future. I can't make any promises about anything that's going to happen in the future, because it's the future. But that's certainly the intent, is that we work with communities in the future to figure out what's beneficial.
Thank you. Go ahead, sir.
So let me understand this. Will there be a verification process that the developer has notified those property owners and those associations? Or is it just going to be by assumption?
Now, in today's system, you have to show your certified letter receipts that you've mailed that notice. And in the future, same kind of deal. You have to prove you've done it.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, yes.
Well, hello. Well, I live on the west side, as most of the planners know, and we have a sector plan that we rely on totally, and that's the Fourth Corridor Plan. And that plan has done a fantastic job at getting development to be sensitive to the landscape, because it's near the bosque and it has these spectacular views. That's the whole reason you have that plan. And you don't need those policies for all of Albuquerque. You needed it, and you need it right there. And I know you say you put it in, you got this overlay zone in the IDO, but it's spread out in different pages. It's so complicated. This book that I have, the Fourth Corridor Plan, was easy. I never done planning, and I picked it up and I understood it. And I could look at the development that's been done so far, and it followed it. And then the new stuff came in and they weren't following it. And I said, something's wrong here. So I had to figure out what it is, and then I found it in the book. They just weren't following the plan. And it took somebody to go and tell them, you're not following it. And I had to go to the UDC and I had to tell them, they are not in compliance.